How did an embargo on bird poop inadvertently contribute to the Holocaust? How did mammals end up with an eye inside their brain? Can you snap somebody's neck like in the movies? Learn the truth behind these and much more in my new book, Facts That Aren't True. Link in the description. A couple times a year, I go to Barnes & Noble and I spend about $200 on books. And in my most recent haul, I picked up this Mary Roach book. It's about science's search for the afterlife. I've read 3 of her books before, and I bought 3 more. Sam Keen is my favorite pop science writer, but she's my second favorite. And they're really kind of like 1A and 1B. In this book, you can see I marked a bunch of stuff in the middle because I learned about this very interesting period in American history where Scientific American, the journal, and Harry Houdini and a few others teamed up to investigate claims of spiritualism. I will make a feature video about that, but just kind of to give you a preview of it, essentially what was happening was there were these women that claimed they could move tables and summon ectoplasm out of their bodies. Turned out they were just stuffing cheesecloth in their vaginas and then pulling it out and saying, "Look, it's ectoplasm." And people really fell for that. In doing my research, I wanted to look into Scientific American because they published a bunch of stories about this. Now, I ended up getting a subscription to Scientific American for this, so I could read their backlog of all their issues, going back to 1849. This video isn't sponsored or anything by them. I don't have any sponsors, but it only cost me $39, and for that, I get access to every single issue they've ever published, going back to 1849 and, of course, all the way up to the present. And I think that that's actually pretty cool. I think history is amazing, so looking back at this, it's cool to see what was going on in the scientific circles. What were people thinking? What were they right about? What were they wrong about? What was popular at the time? This is the very first issue from August of 1845. I think I said 49 earlier. I meant 45. I've been going through several of these from the 1800s, and what I've noticed is a huge amount of it is really just engineering stuff. The cover features a new kind of train car and the technology that makes it kind of new and interesting for the time. Here's an 1849 issue, and it's showing a buckwheat separator. There's a section toward the end for new different kinds of inventions. And then there's this huge list of patent claims that you get at the end. Oh, look, this 1849 issue has a list of advertisements. I wonder what kind of advertisements there are on... Oh no, it's so racist. The Phrenological Journal. This journal is a monthly publication containing 36 octavo pages at $1 a year in advance. To reform and perfect ourselves and our race is the utmost exalted of all works. Oh no. Well, that is a pre-Civil War science journal for you. And it's full of all kinds of weird stuff. You know, I've never read Scientific American before, but even this is the most recent issue. Everything is a really short blurb. That's kind of surprising. I've been getting National Geographics since 2015, and National Geographic magazine, it'll only have 3 or 4 feature articles, but they run for, between 6 to 10 pages typically. These early issues, and again, this is the very first one, but even up to issues this is 1892, they really don't devote a huge amount of time to anything. Again, except for some of the engineering stuff. I mean, like this part right here, that's an entire article, just a paragraph. But getting away from what I was saying, some of the engineering stuff, because they go into huge amounts of detail about how the thing works. Somebody had to engrave that picture in order for this magazine to be produced. That's really impressive, and it must have been so expensive at the time to make these. Here in this story, we can see, if you want to pause and read it for yourself, basically a bunch of people saw a bunch of hay just simply lift up into the air, even though there was no wind. I'm guessing it's one of those where what I always called them when I was a kid was a cornstalk tornado. Every now and then you just get a weird cyclone of air, and it would, when the fields, after they had been harvested, there were a lot of corn husks left over. So yeah, corn husk tornado. And they don't weigh hardly anything, so they'd get picked up. I'm guessing maybe that's what this was, although it said it got lifted beyond the clouds. I think people maybe were just more gullible back then. Michael Faraday being mentioned over there on the right. That's kind of cool. Cause of sound in thunder. Okay, here's some science. Thunder is one of the consequences resulting from lightning, and lightning appears to be occasioned by the combustion of some of the inflammable particles of air. Wow, that's not true. According to more recent opinions, of a condensation of aerial matter conducing to electricity, by which in either case a vacuum is created. That sounds more accurate. Writing from this time is so hard to read. This is the Emancipation Proclamation. Go ahead and pause and read this and just be like, how did anybody ever understand anything anybody was saying? The surrounding atoms, which remain uninfluenced by this change, being forced together by the whole weight of the atmosphere, greatly constrict each other, but their elastic nature causes them immediately to expand. And by this enlargement, their sonorous property is acquired. That would have to do with sound, like sonar. A centrifugal force being thus established, it acts in all directions alike, but as the circle extends, its propulsive power becomes gradually diminished, till at last its pressure is no longer felt nor sound created. The rumbling noise of thunder is produced by that portion of the sonorous circle which strikes upon the earth, whence it becomes condensed, and being intercepted in its upward course by dense masses of vapor, it is again reflected, and this alternate motion and reverberation continue until the interruption ceases or the original force is exhausted. This is pretty much entirely false, but for 1849, I mean, it's pretty good. That idea of the heat causing expansion and then a vacuum and then the air slamming back together, causing the sound wave, that's very reasonable, but that's not what happens. The shock wave is caused by the lightning bolt expanding the air in the first place. So that initial intense heat and the expansion, that is the sound wave. There's no cavitation, like an implosion of air or anything like that. That kind of thing can happen in water, but that's not what's going on with lightning. Here we have, I guess, a dedicated science section. First principles of mechanics. It's really just a description of basic Newtonian mechanics, and then they give you an illustration. Imagine this happening. It's pretty good. It seems to be sort of just their attempt to get general scientific ideas out there. I don't know, the literacy rate back then was a lot higher than I would have expected. It was actually up to like 70%, at least for white Americans. For African Americans, it was only like 20%. So this kind of thing could be read by almost anybody. I don't know what compulsory education, the rate of it, I don't know what it was like back then. So it seems kind of like a noble and cool thing that they're doing with this. The description of chemistry here is so poetic, and it's very interesting the way they do it. There is no art or science by which a man can accomplish a work of creation with so much variety as by chemistry. That's true. Another cool piece of history here, the telegraph was a pretty new thing, and they're just sort of discussing how cool it is that telegraphs exist. An improved cotton gin, again, so much of this is really just engineering stuff. which back then that was the big thing. And we couldn't do all that sophisticated sciences before On the Origin of Species was even published. Here we have a sort of debunking article, I guess. I looked into this Signor Muzzy guy, and he claimed that he created, apparently this is an illustration of maybe what it looked like, but he claimed to have created like a blimp, essentially. It's a flying vessel that didn't require an oar or rudders or anything like that, but it was just all completely made up, and that seems to be what they're saying. Interesting experiments. All right, let's check it out. I don't know what they're describing here. It sounds to me like this might be either a single or double replacement reaction. This is a pretty common experiment that we do in high school chemistry. You take all these different solutions, silver nitrate, iron chloride, sodium chloride, nickel something, I don't remember, copper sulfate. A lot of them are colorless, but when you mix them together, they do either a single or double replacement reaction. It forms a precipitate, and so it changes color right before your eyes. Like I said, you can read this if you want. I don't know if that's exactly what they're talking about. It sounds like that, but it also kind of sounds like when you just take a Sharpie and put a dot on the end of some chromatography paper or whatever that's called, dip in water, it'll climb up and separate the colors. That's what I thought they were saying at first, but because they're talking about mixing solutions, I don't know. Okay, some more of the weirdness. Yeah, there's tons of religious stuff in these old issues. Here's a different issue from 1849, and I saw that headline in the table of contents, and I thought, oh, cool, a really old issue talking about astronomy. I'm not even sure if we knew the planet Neptune existed yet, so what could this be? And it's some religious nonsense. First of all, it's really short, which is disappointing, but it's just, apparently some professor was going around saying, hey, when the second coming happens, when the rapture happens, what's going to happen to the moon? How is that something for astronomers to wonder about? It's just, it's so bizarre. I need to go through these with a historian or something to try to understand the context a little better. Now, you probably all have this intuition that religion is just becoming more and more and more irrelevant in the world. I think we probably misunderstand just how much that was the biggest part of everybody's life not even that long ago. I remember reading some interesting stuff about when Japan finally ended their complete isolationism, and some, not explorers, but kind of like ambassador explorers from Japan toured the United States, and then they returned home to tell everybody what they learned about, because they just didn't know very much about the outside world. And I remember one of the things, it's actually the only thing I remember from reading that story, was the Japanese reported that they found it really extraordinary and kind of cool how every American, from the humblest, poorest person to the richest person, they all seem to have kind of like an encyclopedic knowledge of the Bible. Right next to this rapture astronomy piece is the spirit world. Now, you can read the whole thing for yourself if you want. I just need to read the end. It's so funny. All ghost stories are made up of just such miserable fiddle-faddle, and we all know that the swallowing of pins, mounting the air on broomsticks, I assume that means etc., constitute the amount of witch learning. Fiddle-faddle. So let's take a look at this rational religion piece in a science journal from 1849. What is true and rational religion? It's an oxymoron, that's what it is. In answering this important question, we shall come to the point at once, without prejudice or sectarian influence, and laying aside all traditional superstition, which has had its origin in clerical policy, inquire what is now the will of the blessed deity, with regard to the conduct of the children of men. On second thought, I'm going to plan B here. I'm sorry, I might be stupid and I am kind of a bad reader, but that's very hard to follow. So I copy and pasted the whole thing and asked for a plain English translation. What is true and rational religion? To answer this important question clearly and without bias or influence from religious traditions or sects, let's set aside superstitions that were created by religious authorities for control. Okay. Instead, let's sincerely ask, what does God want from us now? How should we, as imperfect human beings, live in a way that is pleasing to our Creator, who is always aware of what we do and even what we think? Why is this in a science journal? We've carefully thought about this, and based on all the evidence and reasoning, we're confident in our answer. First, as thinking people, we should always recognize God as our Creator and the one who keeps us alive each day. Each of us depends on God's care to keep the natural systems that sustain our lives working properly and to protect us from the many dangers our fragile bodies face. Sure, but what does this allow anybody to do that they can't already do? How is this a guiding principle for more rationalism? This is just telling people what to think, not how to think. Because of this, it's only right and logical that we regularly thank God for his goodness and ask him for the help we need in life. This makes sense even without religious texts, but since the Bible specifically invites us to do this and assures us that God hears and responds, it's surprising that anybody who has read it would ignore this privilege or be embarrassed to pray or give thanks. Still waiting for how this in any way is a guide for rationality. After worshiping God through gratitude and prayer, we should also let go of anger and bitterness toward other people and instead treat them with kindness and love. Okay? This makes sense too, especially, hi kitty cat, since God treated us with kindness. Living this way brings glory to God, benefits all of society, and brings peace and happiness to our own lives. I love that, but there's no rationality here. Another part of rational religion is being accepting of whatever happens in life, trusting that God is good and that everything is ultimately for our good. Yeah, so this is actually one of the things I can't stand. It is the willful suspension of critical thinking and of being introspective and putting your attitude in a place where you're trying to understand what happened and try to get perhaps better outcomes in the future. Because this to me reeks of the whole, I'm just going to put trust in God and then therefore not do anything. Or, oh, something terrible happened? Well, that was part of God's plan. No, maybe when a school gets shot up, it has nothing to do with God's plan. We shouldn't be shy about living this way openly among others. Okay? This, living with gratitude, kindness, trust, and an open relationship with God is what we call rational religion. There's no rationality in any of that. You can claim it's logically consistent with your belief system, and that's fine, but to call any of that rational, no. Religious intelligence. The following item is the more interesting on account of a recent statement by one of the missionaries that the Chinese are supposed to spend $360 million annually for incense to burn before their idols. So it's just those damn heathens. Why aren't they Christian? This seems to just be saying that they sent some pamphlets promoting Christianity to missionaries in China, and the emperor said, yeah, these are cool. These are consistent with the things we think are good. I hope you found that as interesting as I did. Please like and share this. Typically, when I stray from my normal content, YouTube, the algorithm is just kind of like, I'm not going to stop uploading videos of me talking to morons, but I want to include stuff like this as well. So hopefully this takes off a little bit. Thanks for watching.